Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 650, Spotify's Spot of Trouble. For Monday, October 18th, 2021. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. Just a couple of years ago, Spotify was poised to take over the podcasting world. But now suddenly the luster has worn thin as the company faces multiple challenges. Is it all just a bump in the road, or is their effort imploding? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, working from home accused of killing productivity, whether TikTok is a new home shopping channel, the nascent strength of local retail, plus this week's fair, fail, foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the co-founder of brand consultancy Metaforce, Mr. Alan Adamson joins us. Hi, Alan.
Thanks for inviting me, Bob. Pleasure to be here.
I love having you on the program. Glad you can make it. Now, also with us, she's the founder of C-Spot Run, a direct response creative shop, as well as the host of the Where's the Beef Tech versus Creative podcast over on Fireside. Ms. Wendy Cooper joins us. Hi, Wendy.
Hey, Bob, thanks for having me. I had to unmute myself. Good to be here.
I was going to say, I think there's a mute involved somewhere.
I know. Sorry.
And finally, we have the CEO and co-founder of Datos, Mr. Eli Goodman is back. Hi, Eli.
Bob, thanks for having me on again.
Love having you on the program as well. This is a great panel. This is like the wonder panel for me. I'm very excited about this because I think you guys are going to have a great conversation on the topics that we have tonight. First up, let's start with Spotify's troubles. Yet another high-profile podcast, last podcast on the left, has exited its deal with Spotify. Now, the network's own employees are also railing against the spread of misinformation on the network through shows like the Joe Rogan Experience, and the money is going the wrong way. It's not very profitable. So, Eli, is all this just Spotify's problem? Or are they indicative of greater problems within the podcasting space? And what does it mean to Spotify's intention to dominate in the podcasting world? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll say this. It's definitely not good for Spotify, right? when you are like losing big podcasts. And I have a lot of thoughts on that when we probably dive in deeper into their strategy related to like acquisitions versus licensing and all that type of stuff. But it is, I wouldn't say as much a problem for the ecosystem at this stage as much as this is a good reckoning for the ecosystem to be having, right? Like when it comes to Spotify and what they've been, to be frank, accomplishing for many years now, right after IPOing and having all sorts of money and all sorts of things, it's given them some like a very tight position of power, when it comes to negotiating with podcast owners, podcast creators, licensing, et cetera, and the fact that those particular terms, which we certainly could dive into in our thoughts on it, have reached a point that they are overreaching, and the exposure on the platform is not nearly as valuable to the creators as owning and or keeping their RSS feeds and their audience and so on and so forth. I think that Spotify has a problem on its hands that it really needs to deal with about how it positions with, the content creators.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I love the kind of hint that you gave there of the deeper problems of trying to acquire the different shows as opposed to doing licensing deals. Do you want to go into that a little bit further, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the panel? But I'd love to hear some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me just flesh that out a little bit, because this is this is a problem that platforms have. And if we went back and we even use something like Netflix as an example, right? Like in the beginning, you're licensing everybody else's content, and then eventually you began acquiring things, acquiring properties, and or creating your own. But traditionally, when it comes to the way that Spotify makes money, and there are public companies, everybody could certainly look this up. They state that about 90% of their revenues come from premium subscriptions, right? Like signing up for $9.99 a month to be able to have unlimited access to all of their content and no ads and so on and so forth, and about 10% from advertising. So when it comes to ownership versus licensing, there are a couple of things that Spotify has to deal with that then play out as it relates to the creators themselves, and call it the original owners of shows. If you sell your show, right, like if Spotify buys you, you are basically agreeing to their rules, right? I think that's pretty straightforward. Anybody that is an acquisition target would understand that. But the more powerful that you become, right, and let's just, without getting into the politics of it, but talk about like a Joe Rogan or a Kim Kardashian, you don't have to sell to Spotify and play by all of their rules and give over your entire audience network. You can license your data to them exclusively, and they will pay you incredibly handsomely for it. But you still maintain things like editorial control, the entire RSS history of everybody that you have access to, and so on and so forth. So if I had $100 million worth podcast that they were willing to license from me and I didn't even have to sell it, that's awesome for me. But that's not great for pretty much everybody else down funnel in the podcast world, right? Because you don't have the clout to be able to negotiate those terms. And if you, anyway, go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, and ultimately it's not good for Spotify either. I mean, because this is the problem that a lot of the networks, the broadcast networks, have run into over the years. They've one of these big shows, they license with production companies to make these shows. And then suddenly the streaming world came in, where ownership of the content is the real power and is the real money-making opportunity. And suddenly a lot of these networks were caught flat-footed without a whole lot of the shows that they had been known for broadcasting. So, I can see why they want to go for the ownership of the shows, or maybe even go that way. But is it even possible, considering the fact that everybody knows exactly how valuable the property is? Wendy, what are your thoughts on all this? Do you feel like Spotify is falling into the trap that all the networks are falling into, which is that content creators know the value of their content and are not willing to part with it and give them more than exclusive rights, give them ownership?
It's a really loaded question. I can speak from examples for myself, which are, I think it's very competitive out there as a creator. I call myself the creator now. I just figured that it went out, the older creator. But I am considered a creator. I was selected, and I'm going to give Fireside as an example, because it's very competitive out there in wanting and gathering up the creators, right? The creator economy. And Spotify, so let's start with Spotify. As a podcaster, Bob, that through our RSS feeds, our podcasts have always gone out to everywhere globally, right? As much as they possibly can.
Right.
Mine has. I use Libsyn, and it goes out everywhere. It's on Spotify. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible. It's everywhere. And so when the Rogan deal happened, I said, well, that's really sucks. Because I believe indie podcasters, the podcasters with the really valuable audience, right? That niche audience that is going to pay $1,000 because Bob Norp says that, this company and this brand I endorse it and it's really great. They're going to pay that money. That audience is so valuable. It might be small, but it's valuable. Okay. Now, if you're on Libsyn right now, you have to have 15,000 downloads an episode in order to just get into their advertising program frickomatic thing, right? To even qualify for a brand to even think about inserting into your podcast. 15,000 downloads an episode, that takes a lot of time and effort from a creator. And I also might add marketing money and networking and everything that you have to do in order to get that audience, keep that audience, and have them stick, is the cost that the creator has. And most creators don't look at it that way, right? Oh, I'm podcasting. So there's billions of these freaking creators that are out there podcasting. There's only a certain segment of the audience of the podcasters that actually have a lot of value in the standard terms of thousands and thousands and thousands of listeners, which really we all know means maybe something in podcasting, maybe it doesn't mean something in podcasting. But when Spotify comes along and they pay Joe Rogan $1 million or $100 million, excuse me, I'm sorry, Joe, not $1 million, God forbid, $100 million for his exclusive rights to his content, to him, right? Mm-hmm. He basically, I agree that whatever he does under that original content, right? So this is Spotify basically saying we are creating original content, and they are creating a lot of original content. And this is the way Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, they all get around things, is that they end up creating original content. But that original content belongs to them for a reason. So if you come from outside, which Joe Rogan did, with a stupid price point of $100 million, that only hurt every other podcaster that wasn't a celebrity and didn't have a built-in huge audience. So I think it's wrong what Spotify is doing in that respect.
When you think about it, what Spotify was doing overall and what Spotify has done, they paid a lot of money for podcasts like The Last Podcast on the Left and Joe Rogan Experience. They brought them in and they made them only through their network. And that was to drive people to, subscribe to Spotify, get their content, and also to discover new shows in that environment. Because once you're in the environment, you're less likely to look outside for other types of content.
Can I ask you a question? Do you find that's true as a consumer? Think about it. I'm a consumer. I'm on Spotify.
Yeah, but you're not.
I rarely listen to Spotify, Bob.
You're not a consumer. You're a creator. You have a different perspective. I am a consumer,
though, too.
I know. We're all a consumer, but we're knowledgeable consumers, much more knowledgeable than the average consumer. Most people don't even have any idea what podcasting is. When you only have we talk about the phenomenal numbers for podcasting, but it's still in the 20 percentile in terms of the people who've even tried a podcast. So, that doesn't really bode well for people who are entering this space through Spotify, not realizing that there is a greater ecosystem of podcasts out there. It's just in that one network.
But let me ask you this. Are people of the smaller, little, tiny audiences actually entering Spotify's world? They only want people that have big audiences, or podcasters, creators that have big audiences. On the other hand, Fireside is doing is Fireside is saying, they started off by saying, we're going to support these really cool creators that we're hand selecting because we believe in you. We believe you're going to bring value. And what they're doing is they use creators. This is my beef. Creators are being used to create content, spending their time, their money, with the hopes that they're going to get noticed one day, because this is what these platforms are basically saying. And then the audience doesn't come in, or suddenly you're getting surrounded by B celebrities that, are coming in with their podcast, or A celebrities, whatever it is. This pushes you back down. But yet you have spent, as a creator, a lot of your valuable time, energy, creativity, IP, whatever it is, and you're not getting that benefit. So until somebody comes along and treats the creators, whoever they might be, as they should be treated, then I think all the platforms are going to suffer, and the creators are going to rule. Because that's what's happening.
Alan, I want you to weigh in at this point, because you've heard the conversation, you've heard what's going on. There's a lot of players out there trying to do what Wendy's saying. The Firesides of the world, trying to raise up new podcasters and new opportunities, new creators, give them a platform, give them a chance to shine and become big. But, when you're talking about a population that really doesn't understand how to get podcasting, except maybe they've seen it on their Apple device or something like that. So, is this really going to work in the end? And the bigger question is Spotify hurting the podcasting world, or is it just, which is another big story from the news this week about how a lot of people are starting to feel like Spotify is killing podcasting. But what are your thoughts on this whole malaise, and what would you do?
Well, it's, there are a number of questions bundled up in that. I to start with your first one, I don't think most consumers, are that familiar with podcasts, and if they go to one, they search for it, and it seems to be still a word of mouth driven business where somebody says, "Have you heard this?" And I don't think people are searching through a podcast directory looking for something interesting to view. So and I also think so at one end, consumers are not really clear, and if they hear a title, they get a title, which goes back to me to the challenge that all the zooming out, all the streaming services, network services has always had. They've always struggled to attach powerful content to their umbrella brand, be it Netflix or NBC or whatever it was, must-watch TV, and most have failed. Most of the time, if there's, just because NBC tried to own must-watch TV, the minute they didn't have content that was must-watch, no one went there. And so I think it's really hard as an aggregator. And obviously, Spotify wants to, have as many worms on the hook as possible to get people in to buy their core offering. But it's a really tricky world to try to buy great content and transfer its equity so that people come to you when they first say, well, I don't know what I'm going to listen to, and start with you, with the exception of perhaps Disney.
Now that dovetails into what Eli was talking about a little bit earlier, which is the business model of Spotify versus the business model of these aggregators. Because I would put Spotify in the network category. It's not so much an aggregator as much as it is trying to do deals with content creators to have exclusivity on their network. That's a little bit different than the aggregators, which are just pulling together freely available content on the RSS streams. So what would you say about the business model here that you were mentioning earlier? Where is it falling down? Where is it strong? Where is it weak? What do you think the long game is for Spotify at this point?
Yeah, I think the long game is to survive in either end of the business. You need to be a master at finding the best talent or content and having that best content come to you. You have to be a magnet for content. I think that's what's, driving Netflix right now is not so much that they can write a check bigger than Amazon or Apple, So I think to survive in the business, they need to be the first port of call for the best content providers, and that's the only recipe that matters.
Eli, do you agree with that? I mean, it's just like you were the one who brought this up, so I'd love for you to weigh in at this point.
No, that is, Alan is definitely correct, but let me add to that because there's some very specific financial subscription model type of stuff that Spotify has going on. Like if you break down and look at and listen into their earnings calls and whatnot. And by the way, I don't work in finance, but it is something I do take an interest in. And it's a couple of things, right? We already mentioned 90% of their business comes from subscriptions, 10% from advertising. But a couple things that are very interesting about what has happened with Spotify's finances over the past few years. One, they lose money. Right? They lose a lot of money, right? So let's be clear, they may be a public organization, but they are running at a loss. And, anytime, and this is no different than Sirius Radio going out and paying Howard Stern, I don't know, $500 million now or whatever it is they're paying him, or when Netflix was paying $100 million for one season of Friends, I believe was the number, if I'm not mistaken on that. They have a very specific calculation about if you add Joe Rogan for $100 million over X amount of time, how many $9.99 subscriptions are going to be able to add,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Certainly there is a mathematical calculation. But a second thing, and this is actually an incredibly important and rarely understood point, is when you pay for that $9.99, it's ad-free, right? You're like, oh, no ads, et cetera, et cetera. But when they go out and they license and they don't own, right? When they license like a Joe Rogan or some others, and I don't know every podcast, but let's say this definitely happens, it allows them to double dip. Because then ads will actually be played outside that have been sold by that actual owner. And they're just like, well, it's not included in our subscription. I'm sorry. So now they're getting a cut of that revenue as well. Right. So let's also not forget that basically the podcasts are probably in the end like a net break even, maybe for them. But also remember, they put their hand on the scale just last year related to the algorithmic recommendations as it relates to what they pay out in royalties for music, right? So this is a good point that Wendy made earlier, which is the haves, the really rich places, they have the money to then pay Spotify in order to put the hand on the scale on the recommendation algorithm for them so that they are recommended more often. So this is another way that they're driving money, and it's only being driven by the people and the companies that have deep pockets, right? The independents don't have the money to juice the algorithm via buying that from Spotify. Right. So Spotify, I think, is putting themselves into a long-term house of cards, as Alan was talking about, that if you don't own the great content, you are going to get behind this, where 3 years into a 3-year deal, somebody that you paid $100 million for is going to be like 500. And then they got a real problem.
Well, all I can say is I'm glad my show continues to do well in spite of not being part of any of these networks. But we'll have to see what happens as we go forward. Well, I want to move on and talk about work from home. Working from home has been the kind of the word of the pandemic. It's been something that describes everything that we've had to do in order to keep business running as we kind of live in quarantine. And as we start to open it up again, it's coming into question whether work from home will continue. Now, many people, including me, thought that the great work from home experiment of the pandemic would lead to large-scale rebellion about ever stepping in an office again for the ad industry. But now, as offices do reopen, many are clamoring to go back. So, Alan, were we wrong that the that work from home is kind of a model that's not going to work? That is going to work, and then I'm like falling apart here. So, Alan, jump in. Trying to get this one. Yeah, it's just like basically we're trying to figure out whether work from home is a thing that we're going to continue to have in our lives, or whether work from home is actually killing things like productivity, socialization, effectiveness, creativity. Is it a roadblock that needs to go away? Which would you weigh in on, and what would you think the industry needs to do going forward?
Well, I don't think it's going away, but I don't think, it will be done. Obviously, it's probably not going to happen at the same level as when we were, wiping down our groceries. So I think it also varies by business and varies by age group, because most companies, let's start with the creative and the ad business, are driven by younger talent, and young kids don't want to stay in a studio apartment staring at a screen. When I started off my career early in the Mad Men days at Ogilvy, one of the best parts of the job was not writing a copy strategy or doing a competitive media analysis. It was, hanging out at Ogilvy and going out with the gang. And so I think for younger consumers, they're going to go back. Younger employees are going to go back for the most part. Not every day. Sometimes they may work from from the beach or something. But in general, that group, I think, wants to go back. And I think some managers will be less comfortable with it than others. When I ran a big office, I was a line of sight manager, and so I would have an idea, look up, see Debbie walking down the hall, and go talk to Debbie and say, "Hey, have you thought of doing this?" And I don't think I would have been successful had I gone to my desk and set up a meeting with Debbie 3 weeks from now when she's available on her online calendar. So, I think it depends on the manager, it depends on the industry. But ultimately, I think employers have to do what talent wants. It's a talent-driven business. And if you don't have the best talent, you don't survive. I was working with a recruiting firm. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but its target, the employees they want to recruit, was coders who were incredibly hard to find. And these kids were everywhere, but in the office. And that was fine, because if you want the best coder, that's the game you have to play. You have to pay the top dollars. And if they're, coding between runs on an Aspen Mountain, fine. But, I think it's going to be all of the above and different industries and different company cultures. But I'm still a believer that company cultures drive success. And I don't think you can build culture online.
I think I disagree with you. I'm not going to go into it yet because I want Eli to weigh in on this, but it's just like I still have this feeling that work from home is something that is not a weight on things like creativity, socialization, culture. It's not a weight on it. I mean, I was going to get into this, but I shouldn't. I should let Eli weigh in. What are your thoughts on this, Eli? Are you in agreement with Alan that it's just like it's going to be a little bit of both going forward, and that you need to have some office culture in order to have that serendipity that he described, or can all that be recreated in an online environment and still get the same level of work and creativity and even serendipity that you can get in an office environment? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, not just because I, like everybody else, have been on my couch working from home, for the past 2 years, but I very specifically founded a company and have hired and have people working all across the globe from home where we've never physically met each other, right? And we have a thriving business and do things. And it is quite difficult, to be able to handle any number of items. And I'll say this, right? Probably the best way that I could put it, because I am actually in support of people working from home if that's what works for them, right? Because the best way I could state it is related. I'm going to paraphrase a scene from Mad Men that I remember from long ago. And it was one of the times when the creatives in the office were kind of messing around and just playing games all day. And I think, Pete and Roger were like, why do we have to work all day and they just get to play? And Don turns to them and says, they're not productive until they are. And I feel like that was a very telling line about how different people can be motivated and be productive at different times of the day, in different capacities. They're motivated in different ways. Like they have families, they have people they need to care about. I mean, it's hard to be able to state and say there is a uniform way that everybody has to participate in order to get that to work. But I will say this, and Alan definitely was hitting on it related to young people. I feel that actually the number one biggest downside of all of this, yes, everybody has a social life. They can still figure it out. And I agree. In my younger years, I love to go out and rock with my coworkers, right? That was definitely a thing. And some of my best friends in the world came from it. But probably the number one issue is training. New employees, particularly young ones, that part of the learning process is just being there. Is talking to people, listening to them all day, asking them questions on the fly, and not having formal sit-down meetings. Think about how many times we all have joked about how many meetings we've had at big bureaucratic companies and how much time you spend in conference rooms. Imagine that's just your entire day. You just happen to be doing it from home. All right, that's effectively what a new young person joining a company gets. A bunch of 1-hour meetings or half-hour meetings. So I feel like that is definitely a long-term detriment that needs to be sorted through. And at the very least, a hybrid model is something that I would encourage, depending upon somebody's particular situation.
The one thing that keeps coming up over and over again, and it comes up in the articles that I kind of found for this story this week, is that it's killing productivity. And Wendy, I can't see how that could possibly be the case. I mean, I suppose if you're a slacker or somebody who just doesn't really need someone looking over their shoulder to make sure their work gets done, I'm sure you could be a lot less productive in that environment. But I mean, the hour-long meetings that Eli's describing have become productive opportunities because most of the time you're sitting in a meeting and you don't need to participate except for maybe 5-10% of the time. You can continue working while the meeting goes on around you with stuff that doesn't apply to you. The fact is that you can get in touch with people faster and on their schedule so that you're not interrupting them, but you're still getting quality time one-on-one. In a lot of ways, I've thrived in this environment with the companies I've been working with. What are your thoughts?
I would kill right now to get in my car and drive into an office and be surrounded by a bunch of creative people doing stuff. I would die for that.
I'm the odd man out, it seems.
And here's why. Besides the fact that I have always worked from home, the rare occasions that I had a gig where I was actually in-house and, I loved it. I loved getting together with the team and saying, okay, who's doing this? Who's doing that? Let's do this. Let's think about it. I would love that. And when And, even when I'm producing commercials or, writing the shows and casting, doing all of that stuff, I was always doing that as from home. And yeah, I think it was Alan that said, yeah, you have your remote team. I've always had that kind of going on, right? But I think my one son is 30, and he's an artist. We live here in Silicon Beach. And he said to me at one point, Mom, I cannot wait to get back to WeWork. Every one of his friends, and they're a big group of friends, they're in tech-based, they're in startups, and he happens to be the artist of the group, but they all were just dying to get back into their cool offices, and a lot of them now have leased the buildings and gotten great deals. And so there are these startups that they're young and they're hiring and they're thriving, and they don't want to do it from home. It's like, would you want to stare at a screen if you were 30 years old? Right? No, it really bothered them. So I was always thinking, every time I heard you guys talk, Bob, and you about the work from home thing, it's like you also have to think of the mental health of working from home and the productivity factor, because I happen to be an expert on this. If I'm trying to create, if I'm trying really to create something, I've got no energy collaboration with anybody else, really. That physical energy isn't there. The movement, the smiles, the laughing, the whatever, like that, the whatever. And that, I think that's a missing link when you're actually trying to create. So what people do, right, is they go outside, they take a walk. This is like what they say to do. Or go take a yoga class. Oh, we're a creative house, but we want you to work at home. And look at this. We're going to give you, what was the article? The article, something like Peaceful Friday. Or you can listen to do yoga, from 11 to 1. It's like, we always, the places I worked, we always had yoga at lunchtime down in the cafeteria area or whatever. It's nothing new. It's the energy of being able to be around other human beings. This is what's missing. This is the connectivity, disconnected humanity. So we are only asking for it more if we say, okay, let's make sure we can do our laundry while we're on a Zoom call, or I can be dusting my office and listening to whomever while I'm distracted, because I don't really need to hear it. But no, I totally love the fact that, of course, there'll be a hybrid. Of course, it'll depend on if you're a gigger or whatever. But I think the energy, especially in the creative world, from being together is so important to what we deliver for our clients and how we become better creators. So
let me go back to Alan with this. The hybrid model is something that you brought up, and the rest of it, everybody else has kind of run with it. A hybrid model, what does it look like? Is it everybody has to go in the office sometime and everybody can stay at home at other times? Or is it some people can always work at home and other people come into the office more often? I mean, I'm wondering what it looks like for people like me who've absolutely thrived under this environment of being in a work from home situation.
Yeah, if I knew the answer to that, I'd immediately get into the real estate business. I think it's going to be, certainly for folks that have been commuting hours each day, it's going to be, a lot less commuting, but there'll be some time in the office. And I've had some friends already go back in, and it doesn't work if only like 5 people are there, and then they're sitting in a huge office complex with 5 cubicles filled up, and they're on their computer and they don't see anybody. So there has to be some structure, but I do think it's not going. I think there'll be incredibly more work from home especially for certain functions, customer care. But I think for industries that have the need for collaboration, and or knowledge sharing, and or as was previously mentioned, training. Because it's really hard to, especially for businesses that are less structured, where you need to watch and observe and see how people present copy and the showmanship and without that observation, with only seeing the end result and not going to the 5 rehearsal, I think it's gonna, those industries and those functions are gonna gravitate back again, the younger people back to their place, and others will not. If you're, crunching numbers and you're commuting from 100 miles away, you're going to do far less of it. And of course, the biggest thing in terms of productivity for me has been how much closer I am to clients now, where I can Zoom meetings as opposed to flying to Dallas for a 2-hour meeting and then flying back. So I think the productivity side is not only distraction at home. I always had that feeling too, Bob, that when people were out of sight, out of mind, I assumed they were walking the dog. And so I do think, though, when you factor in the ease of connecting with clients now and the increased talent base of being able to get talent wherever they are and not be subject to, well, you move to New York City, otherwise you can't work in my company. I think it's going to be a completely different hybrid, neither anything like we came from, and probably nothing like the pandemic, but somewhere in between.
Well, it's an interesting conversation. The work from home is near to my heart, so I'm hoping that it works out in my favor, but we'll see what happens.
You can work from home for the rest of your life, Bob.
Oh, thank you so
really
much.
Can.
I've said it many times since this pandemic started. I've been training for this marathon. I'm the guy who can sit at home forever. Well, next up, just like with the home shopping channels in the 90s, so too TikTok is offering marketers many of the same valuable tools. It's giving them the opportunity to do video demonstration of their products, celebrity pitch men and women, celebrating the product, influential endorsements, people saying it's good, and an as seen on TikTok section appearing in retail stores. It's just the tip of the iceberg of all the value that this is generating for marketers. TikTok is really something. And Wendy, is this a viable model for TikTok to pursue toward profitability? Not just from an advertising standpoint, but from a purely content standpoint where you can create ongoing engagement with the audience, beyond advertisements, just really setting up some kind of platform for marketers to get involved with shilling their products via the platform.
So, considering my background in this area.
Exactly. So that's why you got the question.
You guys that are listening, I represented many products on HSN for many years. And so here, Bob, this really, for me, this is a double thing. So it has to do with live shopping networks, QVC, HSN, which, by the way, they weren't from the 90s. They actually exist and thrive today. And Amazon has live shopping. All these platforms do have live shopping. There's a lot of apps that do a lot of live shopping also. So this whole, to correlate it, a better thing to correlate is that direct response, back in the day, small brands always used traditional direct response strategies, cheap media, proven proof of concept to get onto the retail shelf. This is why DRTV existed. All of those products, they eventually wanted to end up in the as seen on TV aisle at CVS, Rite Aid, whatever. Long story about that. Because more product is moved at retail. More product is moved at retail, and it still will be moved at retail. So TikTok, it's cheap media, because if you go on, and it's the same model, it's cheap media, high exposure. It's basically testimonial driven, because these are not only influencers that are doing this, but if you go on TikTok and you watch the cooking recipes, you'll see that they'll use different brands to do this recipe, but they're all doing the same recipe, right? And so I think it's this interesting combination of paid ads, which I don't see them very much on TikTok for some reason, but paid ads, I guess, and then the influencers, or even the micro or not so micro influencers, creating this viral sensation where they're actually using products within their funny things that they're doing. And that's what's making things explode, right? That's basically, so they're using inexpensive cheap media to drive themselves into the retail store where they're going to get all that other foot traffic, because everybody wants a place in retail. They want that combination. I think it's genius. And I think at the end of the day, that is the quintessential model of cheap media, high exposure, drive into retail, own the space, and and then treat obviously all the customers that you get from direct response or from TikTok or whatever, and then you also get the additional at retail. I think it's the direction everything is probably going to be headed, and then they also capture the younger generation to get that foot traffic into retail, because I don't know about you guys, but where I go here in Manhattan Beach, El Segundo area, there's so much foot traffic, it's ridiculous. People just want to go shopping, and they should.
What you're describing is so close to the meme model. Like memes go crazy on the internet, but they don't really become huge cultural sensations until they're picked up by the evening news. It's kind of the same thing with what we're doing with TikTok. I mean, TikTok is making for great DTC opportunities for products, but until it can drive something to retail, it's not going to be as effective for the company as it possibly could be. It's not. That's
right. That's right. Because
so I mean that's a great opportunity for them. But is it sustainable? Is this sustainable on the platform itself? Like obviously, what you're describing is age old. It's something that we've been doing for decades. But is it sustainable on the TikTok platform, or is it go against the mandate of the audience, which is basically we want to do silly dances and we don't want a whole lot of advertisements?
I think if you're talking about these actually being ads, then I agree. I don't want ads anywhere. You're the only person we know that loves ads, Bob, in your feed. but I have to be honest with you. Nobody really does, and I don't think this is mostly about advertising. I think when I did my research on TikTok, I was noticing that, so somebody posts a recipe, right? And then what other people do, they go, oh, I'm going to make Jane's recipe. And then other people make the same recipe, but they do it different ways. And it's really fun to watch how they do that. And then they also select different brands to use, like a different kind of salmon or a different kind of rice, or the mayonnaise that the original person did the recipe of was the one from the Japanese store. So maybe everybody then goes and buys that mayonnaise because that's the one she's using in her rice bowl. But it doesn't, is it an ad? Nowhere does it say an ad. I think it's just this whole viral, really cool thing that happens on TikTok that, they're leveraging that. Now, let me say this. If the brand has to pay TikTok to be on the as seen on TikTok shelf kind of thing, I'd like to understand what that business model really kind of looks like. Or is it a mechanism that the buyer, at the buyer level at retail, they're getting in the store because they are a TikTok, like a Shark Tank product?
Eli, weigh in on this. Tell me what your thoughts are, because it's just like what Wendy positions here is exactly what I was thinking, that, there's a great opportunity for TikTok to have a licensing deal with the as seen on TikTok in this retail environment. But is that a sustainable model for them? Is that something that you believe that they can really capitalize on?
Well, I would say the overarching answer is yes, right? Because in the end, to me, and certainly at this stage, TikTok's an advertising company, right? Like that's how they make money. But advertising as a quote unquote, like capital letter A, could branch off into a lot of things, right? As far as how can they actually value or measure what is the influence that they have on the actual retail sales, whether that be online and or offline. I think the issue at hand for TikTok is, and this is not my expertise, I believe obviously Wendy knows this very, very well, is the economics between if I am TikTok influencing and pushing these things to be sold in physical CVSs or, at whatever, store that somebody's going to, does that suddenly push TikTok to be in the retail business as opposed to more the advertising business? And that to me creates a completely different set of human beings and expertise and intellectual capital that's required in order to capitalize upon it. So,
absolutely.
Yeah,
you're right.
So
that's perfect.
Yeah. So that to me is, if I'm TikTok, just like Facebook, just like Google, you could talk all day about all the different companies that they've bought and all the different companies that they will buy. But at their heart, the tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars that they're all making is all from advertising, right? Like that is the core of where all that money comes from. And why would you mess with that? And I say that as in, to me, if I'm TikTok, I should be figuring out and putting all of my thought behind owning that top to bottom advertising, sponsorship, SponCon, influencer, whatever it's going to be, measuring it in some way, and then taking a slice of it and letting somebody else actually run the physical retail stuff. Because that is an incredibly complex business that has been around for, to be frank, thousands of years, or however long people have been walking in and buying things from somebody else. So I would say I definitely feel it's sustainable. I just think that is one last thing, and I'm sure I'll hand it off because I certainly can spin it off. Think about it as Amazon that started out as selling product and then eventually became an advertising company, right? Flip it is you start out as an advertising company. Which is TikTok, are you going to actually go out and get into the retail business, which is low margin, problematic, like it's just a bit more of an issue. It's not scalable in the same fashion. I think that's a heavy lift.
Well, good thoughts, everybody. I have to move on, though. I got one last topic and we're running out of time. As big business struggles to go hyper-local, shorten delivery times, and manage product availability, local businesses are awakening to the fact that with some minor tech upgrades, they really do have an advantage in their own backyards. The fact that they already are local and that they can deliver to the customer in their local footprint a lot easier than the bigger companies. So, Alan, what is driving this reinvigoration of small business, or at least the hopes for small business, and can it last? What are your thoughts?
I think first, technology that is easier to get. So now they can go online and manage it easy, and so they're not blindsided. So that's easier. And I think they have the advantage of being close to the customer, which in marketing is everyone talks about it, but very few people are. And yes, Amazon and Walmart and Target can have all the AI programming they want. They can say, Alan, you bought this toothpaste yesterday. Don't you want this toothpaste tomorrow? But ultimately, they don't know me. And smaller retailers have the opportunity to really lean into the fact that if they can understand their customers better than any algorithm. And if you combine playing online to negate that, being local, tying into either community things or things that matter to that person, really getting intimate, and then throwing in, if you can't come in, just double click on your phone and we'll have it to you in 3 hours. I think they have a lot of upside. Of course, execution is everything, and lots of retailers struggle just to open the door and turn on the lights. And this is going to be a challenge to get them to do that and to think differently than just being, a distribution point and selling stuff they have on the shelf.
One of the things that stood out in the article for me that we're referencing is that retailers have better access to inventory management tools, and that they can align what's all available on their website with what's available in their store a lot easier than they were in the past. So they have essentially the competitive advantage that Amazon has had for years at their fingertips, plus this local stuff, this local ability that was not present. That's simply not present at the larger levels of the Googles and Facebooks and retailers like Amazons of the world. So, Eli, what are your thoughts on that? Is data the kind of linchpin that's going to make or break local retail at this point?
Well, yes, let's say, but that's more for the tech companies, because I just have a hard time seeing local retail diving that deep into the analytics unless it's presented to them in a very easy and straightforward recommendation fashion. But I'll tell you this is something also very near and dear to me. Bob, you really nailed the topics this week, because I live here in New York City and I order everything, right? On demand, stuff coming in a few days, like Amazon, like whatever it may be. And I actually had 2 completely different on-demand retail services delivering me stuff at the exact same time the other night. And one, which is a specialty shop that's been doing it for 20 years here in New York, called Fresh Direct, and it's about grocery delivery. They are the most perfect delivery service of all time, but that's all that they do. They have no actual store for me to walk into. And then I used Amazon, what used to be Amazon Prime now, and now Amazon Fresh. And it took them 5 hours and they were late and my popsicles were melted and it was a total disaster. And I reference this as even the biggest companies on the planet that are they know the logistics of delivering billions of dollars of packages on a daily basis. They can't even figure out in the largest market in the United States how to be able to effectively get me what I need on demand. So I would actually put it a different way, that it's less about the data for the local retailers, and it's more about going with like a specialty Uber Eats or DoorDash or somebody that has a specialty in delivering what you need to somebody on demand and tapping into that impulse buy right when they need it to give you another channel. That to me is the last divide that they have to cross. And if they do that, the rest, I won't say it's easy, but if you take care of that point, the rest you could really build upon.
Yeah, and I also think that the barrier to entry has been lowered, right? So small businesses, local businesses, because we're talking about local businesses, right? Because if they're able to deliver locally within a certain radius, then they're a local business. Their inventory controls probably aren't so specialized, coming from, I know 3PL like the back of my hand. And so inventory is very interesting. They're probably not that savvy as far as their inventory data, but what they do have is they have the customer experience. They are local. They are not increasing the carbon footprint like Amazon and all of the other delivery people because Americans are so lazy. Sorry, Eli. But I think we all need to get up off the couch and remember that shipping a box of pencils from Amazon to your door, what that actually does and how many people it takes and the cost of that over the road. And then, of course, you don't like your pencils. And so then you just send them back because it's free returns or whatever. This speaking from being an Amazon brand seller. But also knowing that I put that on my website 6 months ago, that during the pandemic, if you want to order a toilet stool from my website, then I would deliver it to you locally. And I had that option. And Shopify allowed me to be able to have that option to set that up so that I could, so that's where I think the integration is happening with local businesses and the ease of use to bring the technology together with what they have to offer to their customers, because that has been streamlined. And I think the article was actually by Square, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
They're definitely invested in their subject matter, so it wasn't exactly a clean article, but still, it was interesting.
Right. But if we're talking small local businesses, like the donut shop that is so awesome down the street that would not for a million years think even, taking pre-orders because they have a website, I could in 20 minutes have them set up and taught how to do that for the community. And that's where I think the magic lies.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Alan Adamson. You can find him at metaforce.co. That's the home of Metaforce, the brand consultancy that he co-founded. Tell us what's going on in your world, Alan. What would you like to promote?
Despite my push to get everyone back in the office, we're a virtual agency. We have hubs in several cities, but we have talent where we need it, and better talent is accessible. And we're booming right now because clients are trying to grow, and the key to growth is putting the right people on the project and getting them focused fast. So thanks, Bob. It was a pleasure being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for being here as well. Now, next up, we have Wendy Cooper. You can find her at cspotrun.com. You can also find her at wendycooper.com. I'm sure there are other URLs that are available out there that she's involved with, but tell us what's going on.
They all go to the same place, Bob.
Well, tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
Well, I think I love the fact that, if there's any opportunities out there if anybody is looking to bring me, I'll work from home, by the way, but super, looking for opportunities in D2C and mentoring SaaS startups. I do have a podcast. I have several podcasts. You can just Google Wendy Cooper and you will find them all. And you'll find my D2C company, which is at the letter C, spotrun.com. And that's really about it. You can pretty much find me everywhere on Wisdom, on Fireside, and everywhere you get your podcasts. So that's it.
Fantastic.
That's all I got.
And Wendy does great work in all her different endeavors, so you should definitely check her out. Last but not least, we have Eli Goodman. You can find him at Datos Live. That's DATOS.LIVE, Datos Live. Tell us about the company. Tell us about what you'd like to promote. Just give us a shameless plug.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward pitch at this point, right? Like we are we are a global clickstream data provider. We have access to the anonymized, at-scale, privacy-compliant clickstream data. That's the URL sequencing of how people, travel across the internet and browse the internet every day for tens of millions of people worldwide. And I am on the hunt for the big data consuming companies on the planet. Right? Think of anybody that is looking for the anonymized behavior of millions of people. Effectively, we have the data bricks. We're here to help you build your cathedral. So feel free to reach out. Find me at Eli Goodman on LinkedIn, datos.live, eli.goodman at datos.live. Any of those places I'm easily tracked down.
Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating endeavor. I've sat down and talked with Eli about it. It's pretty amazing. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, Eli, for me, the fair has got to be the remembrances for David Kennedy. For those of you who don't know who David Kennedy is, he's one of the founders of Wieden Kennedy, one of the leading agencies in the world right now, one of the only really large at-scale agency that's still independent. What I loved about the memorials that were given toward him were just how much he was a mentor to people and how much he was a caring ear for the growth of so many different people in this industry. What are your thoughts on the passing of David Kennedy, and what do you think it says about the ad industry as a whole?
Well, I mean, listen, if I get to be that old, that would be great. And if people looked back on their experiences with me over the course of my 50-plus year career at that point and said the types of things that they did about him, I would consider it to be an absolute success, right? I mean, I don't think that there's any question that the personal empathy component of being a founder and carving out a new place in the world away from, the Madison Avenues and whatnot, starting out there in Portland, that's got to be a very difficult thing. Like the difference between 0 and 1 in any particular system is the most important difference of any kind. So nothing but respect for my man.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've never met him. I don't know him, but I was really impressed by the eulogies that were given out on all the social media channels. So it was pretty amazing. The fail of this week, I'm going to give to the USB Implementers Forum, Wendy. Apparently, they launched a new brand campaign to end cable confusion with USB-C cables. If you know anything about USB cables, some of them charge, some of them don't. Some of them transfer data, some of them don't. Some of them are used for all three. It's just a confusing mess. So the one thing that I got from this new campaign is the fact that USB-C cables are really confusing. It did nothing to make it less confusing. Everything I looked at made it even more arcane and weird and not possible to understand. What are your thoughts?
I was just totally confused. I mean, totally confused. I was like, okay, I just learned the difference when I got like this P4 Zoom thing for my podcasting, right? And I was like, oh, I need that cable, this cable. Why do they have that? Why do I have to have an adapter? Where do I go? What is that called? No, that's not what it's called. I was like, what is going on? And then this one guy goes, look, lady, it's just a USB-C or whatever it was. And I was so offended. So anyway, yeah, I'm more confused and I really don't care. That's it.
All right. Well, the foul of this week, Alan, is going to go to Facebook. Facebook launched, on the surface, a really good endeavor. They wanted people to buy from Black-owned businesses on Black Friday. So they launched this hashtag Buy Black Friday, which ignores the fact that their platform harbors some of the worst forms of racism, and they're not doing anything to mitigate it, or at least not doing enough to mitigate it. And also there's the fact that the hashtag itself they're using basically tells people to go shopping on Black Friday, which they were going to do anyway. It's not really highlighting enough the fact that this is for Black-owned businesses. So what are your thoughts on this campaign? Did they do a good job? Am I just being a little bit hypercritical, or is this just a problem?
I think you're not being critical enough. Facebook's got every problem in the book, and they're approaching social do good stuff. Well, let's do a little of this. This is it's a nice idea, badly executed, but it's the least of their problems. They are so far from a sense of, if you're going to try to do something good, you have to do it at scale. You have to execute it well, and you have to do it over the long term. Otherwise, you're saying, hey, I'm being a good guy over here when the house is burning. And I think that's what's going on at Facebook.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for The BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly